Vice President Kamala Harris visited the southern border on Arizona on Friday after getting a tour and briefings from border officials. Harris gave a speech calling for tougher border security measures. The vice president also called out former President Trump's inaction on border security. Take a listen.
In the 4 years that Donald Trump was president, he did nothing to fix our broken immigration system. He did not solve the shortage of immigration judges. He did not solve the shortage of border agents. He did not create lawful pathways into our nation. He separated families. He ripped toddlers out of their mothers' arms, put children in cages, and tried to end protections for dreamers. He made the challenges at the border worse. And he is still fanning the flames of fear and division. And let me be clear, that is not the work of a leader. That is not the work of a leader. And that is, in fact, I think we all believe, an abdication of leadership.
You know, recently, border crossings lower under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris than they were when Donald Trump left office. You would never hear that on the right.
Never.
Not on the Trump right.
The Trump right, my lord, the Trump campaign, different networks, they literally change those numbers and lie about them with wild abandon. Former President Trump.
What else you also will not hear, sorry to interrupt, but it's also important that people also remember, you will also not hear that Donald Trump killed the toughest border security bill in American history. And he bragged about it. And then he said to Republicans, blame me for killing the toughest border security bill in history. A bill that was written by Oklahoma conservative James Lankford.
So here's what he's now saying. He says he didn't use his influence to have Senate Republicans vote down the bipartisan border security bill earlier this year. A lie.
Another lie.
Take a listen.
We've got video, by the way.
Take a listen to those remarks from Saturday, followed by what Trump has actually said.
She said, I'm the one that talked him out. I wish I had that ability, that I was the one that said, don't vote for it. But I do have a certain say, but I would have never voted for that bill.
I noticed a lot of the senators are trying to say respectfully they're blaming it on me. I said, that's okay. Please blame it on me. Please. Because they were getting ready to pass a very bad bill. And I'll tell you what, a bad bill is, I'd rather have no bill than a bad bill.
I think they're making a terrible mistake if they vote for the bill. This is a terrible bill for our country.
Well, he said it was a terrible bill because it actually would hurt him politically. He did not want to give Joe Biden then and Kamala Harris credit for signing a bipartisan Republican drafted bill. That would have been the toughest border bill ever that was actually supported by border security, by border agents. They asked that the bill pass.
And it says a lot about Republicans in office in the House and the Senate who take his orders instead of what they claim they're fighting for. So it raises questions up and down the line in terms of Trump's hold. Joining the conversation, we have the president of the National Action Network and host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, Reverend Al Sharpton, and MSNBC contributor and author of the book, How the Right Lost Its Mind, Charlie Sykes. Jonathan Lemire, Katty Kay, and John Heilman are still with us. And Jonathan Lemire, it's interesting. She spoke about that during her speech in Arizona. But do the people who are, understanding and following Trump's lies on the right ever hear what really happened? Do they ever get that information? I feel like Kamala Harris's surrogates need to show up in places where maybe they're not so welcome, but they need to have their voices heard.
Yeah, this is an interesting dilemma for the Harris campaign. How do you penetrate that right-wing ecosystem? Exactly. How do you penetrate that bubble? And as we've been detailing all morning long.
I mean, let's say it. How do you penetrate the lies? How do you penetrate the lies when you actually have Donald Trump now lying
About his lies.
About his lies, now lying, saying, "Oh, I didn't tell them not to support the bill." And of course, he was there all along. You were reporting on it. We were talking about it in real time. That Donald Trump was killing the toughest border security bill ever.
Yeah, he bragged about it. He posted on, beyond the clips we played earlier, he also posted on Truth Social repeatedly urging Republicans to oppose this bill. And he was because he knew it would wound him come November. And I think there are two things going on at once here. I mean, yes, Trump is lie after lie after lie, and we've cataloged them and how dangerous so many of them were this weekend. But we're also hitting another point about the Harris-Walz campaign. And our friend Mark Leibovich wrote about it this weekend in The Atlantic. There's a growing anxiety among Democrats. The Harris and Walz simply aren't there enough. They're not doing enough right now. That Trump, he's lying, and he took the summer off from campaigning, mind you. But since then, he's been relentless. He's everywhere, Reverend Al Sharpton. He's not taking tough questions. He's sitting for friendly interviews. He's up there lying. He's spreading dangerous falsehoods. But he's omnipresent, as he has been in the past. The Harris-Walz scene, now Walz has obviously been a little bit off the grid the last couple of days because he's preparing for tomorrow night's debate. That's understandable. But as Leibovich noted, both of them, there's growing anxiety among Democrats that the Harris campaign is treating them with kid gloves. They're not doing enough, not in terms of interviews, but also just events. They need to be everywhere right now. They've got 5 weeks. What are you hearing? What advice would you give them?
I'm hearing that they are really strategically laying out these last 4.5, 5 weeks and their surrogates to really spread this out. And I hope that's true, because you must not get down, if it's a boxing match, to the last few rounds and then slow up, because that's where you can be in danger of getting knocked out or either counted out in terms of the scorecards. Donald Trump is going to try, out of desperation, because he's looking at these poll numbers, he's looking at the fact that he's not filling up these rallies like he used to. He's going to be all over the place because he's desperate. But desperation could lead to defeat if there is a relaxation on the side of the Democrats. And here's a softball for them. This is a blatant lie that he's telling about what he did or did not do in terms of the Senate bill that could have dealt with the border. But a lie doesn't matter if everyone doesn't know he lied and understand the severity of that lie.
Charlie, we've had a weekend of kind of lots of polls, and when you look at them and when you look at where we are in the race at the moment, it does seem to be tied. One area of vulnerability for the vice president is immigration, as we've been talking about. It's also men generally, men without college degrees, Hispanic men, black men potentially as well. What do you think the vice president needs to do at this stage of the campaign? Is it just getting out there more? Is it doing, as she did, a podcast about sports targeted specifically at men? What would your strategic advice be to her at the moment?
Well, I'm not sure that she needs my strategic advice. I would urge the Democrats just to keep pointing at what Donald Trump is doing, what he is saying. Donald Trump is everywhere. That's absolutely true. But what is he saying? What are the American people seeing if they're paying attention to Donald Trump? And this was an incredibly dark weekend where you had, Donald Trump and, Jonathan Lemire highlighted this over the weekend, the incredibly inflammatory language that he's using about the day of violence, his increasingly racist attacks on immigrants. We're way past any kind of a dog whistle, and there is a theory out there that the more the race is focused on Donald Trump and his unhinged extremism, the better off it is for Kamala Harris and the Democrats, because Donald Trump has made a calculation that his base likes the dark fear, that they like carnage. He is calculating that he can make Americans afraid of migrants, because that's what he thinks about the American people. And we'll find out relatively shortly whether he's right about this. But right now, Donald Trump, I think, is melting down in front of our eyes, and the kind of rhetoric that he's using does not strike me as aimed at swing voters, if there are any swing voters. It does not strike me as reaching out to moderate Republicans who might have doubts about him. He has gone into a very, very dark place, and he's probably going to spend that for the next 5 weeks. And I just want to remind people that in 2016, he moderated in the final weeks of the campaign his message. He actually was not the focus of attention. And when the focus of attention is on Donald Trump, this kind of Donald Trump, he doesn't tend to do very well.
Yeah, and of course, the final week to 10 days, he moderated because he wanted to keep the attention on the James Comey letter, which swung the election for him. And so he just sat back and moderated. In this case, Mika, you'll remember about a month ago, we said his numbers are staying the same. He has a very hard ceiling. And we said, and other people had said, that Donald Trump could not win this election. He needed to make, and it was going to be his goal to make Kamala Harris lose the election. So he was going to have to destroy her. And this is what he thinks destroying her looks like. But calling somebody stupid that destroyed you in a debate actually is probably not the way to do it, especially when you can't answer the most basic questions about policy.